All right, welcome everyone. I'm delighted you're here, and I'm especially delighted to be speaking with my guest, Dr. Clarissa Kristjansson. She is an internationally recognized menopause educator and certified mindfulness practitioner focusing on the positive and transformative nature of this life transition. She is also the host of the popular Thriving Through Menopause podcast and author of the bestsellers The Mindful Menopause and The Potent Power of Menopause, a globally diverse perspective of feminine transformation. Welcome, welcome, Clarissa. I'm so delighted you're here today.
Thank you so much, Kip. I'm delighted to be here.
You know, I was thinking as I was preparing for this interview, I'm certain when you were a little girl, you didn't think to yourself, you know, I'd like to be a menopause educator when I grow up. So tell us a little bit, what was your path? What was your journey to where you are now in your professional life?
Yeah, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a child psychologist. And my parents were very opposed. They didn't think that anybody wanted to do that. They didn't think that was a great career. So I actually started my career studying nutrition. And I became really interested because the psychology was always in there, in people's habits, behaviors, what went on in your head. And I went on to study neuroscience and the impact of, how people really interacted with the world and how our concept of the world changed the way we perceived it. And that became the basis of my 30+ year corporate career, where I worked initially as a researcher and then eventually went on to become quite a senior manager looking after consumer habits, behaviors, etc., and driving big brands around the world. And during that time, of course, we go through life and we get to perimenopause. And it wasn't the happiest time of my life. And I had a lot of issues with my health. And eventually, it really brought my corporate career to a head. And I decided that I was going to change my life. And initially I, side hustled like you do, but I was really interested in mindfulness and the power of our own healing ability, the power of our own mind to help us to move forward. And so I went on a training journey, learned a lot about this. And obviously that's kind of grown over the years into a much deeper interest of not just teaching people some meditations, but really being a certified practitioner working with people who, and particularly women who have, some significant hurdles to leap over with respect to their health and well-being at this life stage.
You are not the first person to tell me that she has had such difficulty with menopause that she's had to leave a corporate career. And I was a little bit surprised about that, but then when I thought about it, and I think about some of the women I know that really suffer, I confess I got off rather lightly when it came to menopause, but many of my friends really suffer with it. And I'm not sure people realize what a challenge it can be. What was it that really stopped you and forced you out of your previous career and then transition into something different?
Yeah, good question. It was mostly the mental health aspect. And it was, for me, it was anxiety. I had always been an anxious person. And I'm anxious because of things that happened in my childhood that were quite traumatic. And sometimes that knocks a child sideways and an adult sideways. But for some of us, we channel all that anxiety and nervousness into a great career, and we look like we're doing really well. We're really corporate swans, I say. We look so nice on the surface and their feet are working like crazy.
I love that analogy. So appropriate.
Yeah. And I think that's for me. And then suddenly, you're kind of flip-ended because so much of your brain changes in perimenopause. And I wasn't able to channel that anxiety into something positive. It was out on the surface. People lost trust in me. I lost confidence in myself. And I became more and more anxious about everything. And that flows through then into other aspects of your health, like my blood pressure was sky high and my sleep wasn't that great, and all of those things. And they're all building on each other until I had a panic attack in the office. And I really couldn't face not addressing it. But I didn't, strangely enough, as someone who'd wanted to be a psychologist, I didn't want to go to one. But I did go to see a therapist, and she was also the founder of the Open Ground mindfulness training organization in Australia where I was living.
So you talked about the changes in your brain, and certainly a kind of brain fog is a symptom that many women talk about having. Is this a result of the hormonal changes that are happening? It manifests in our thought patterns and emotional health as well.
Indeed, you're absolutely right, Kip. What happens is that all of our sex hormones, both estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, all impact regulatory centers in the brain. And what we're often experiencing is a big drop in progesterone in the earlier part of our menopausal journey. And it really does go down to the most base maintenance levels like we had as a child. But that creates anxiety. And because it is a calming, soothing hormone for the body, to lose 65% of it in a relatively short period of time, we're all different, but relatively sharp decline, we feel that, we experience that. And women will report to me and to other practitioners, gosh, I feel so anxious, unsteady, life feels very stressful. And then, of course, estrogen decline is kicking in on the back of that, and that will affect our memory and learning centers, our focus and concentration centers, our emotional regulatory centers. And what a surprise, we feel a bit moody, irritable, angry, even rage, I might even say. We feel tearful, and we're also not remembering, we're foggy. We don't process new events very well. We have problems with verbal reasoning and spatial calculating. So sometimes women will talk about falling over when they've never tripped over before in their life. And that's really what's going on in your brain. And testosterone just kind of declines and just muddies it still more. It tends to make us more anxious. So really what we're seeing is this shift in where we have been to where we are. And of course, if you have a history of anxiety or depression, or you have a more serious psychiatric illness, you may feel those impacts even more.
It's so much, isn't it? It's just so much. And as you say, for some women, it happens very rapidly. Others, it's more gradual. My experience was relatively quick. I went rocketing through menopause in about a year and felt lucky. I felt like I'd gotten off lightly, except that I lost the ability to sleep soundly. So it's been 15 years without a good night's sleep for me. And that certainly catches up. I know a lot of women will be able to relate to the things that you've been talking about. They won't necessarily have understood what the science is behind it, and perhaps have not a lot of interest in it. They just know that they don't feel right in their bodies. They don't know how to manage it. So these are all the downsides, but your focus is in helping women understand that this is really a time of beautiful and positive transition, that in spite of those symptoms that can be challenging at times, it really is a time to embrace rather than to resist. So could you talk a little bit about the positive aspects of menopause and what we can look forward to in the years ahead?
Indeed, Kip. I mean, first and foremost, I think that recognizing and embrace is a good word rather than accept, because it makes it feel like it's not some sort of imposed thing, but it is a natural life transition. We do have to go through it, and being able to embrace and lean into it is a beautiful thing to be able to do, because there's a lot of energy in resisting. And when we resist, there's a lot of stress and mental and physical pain as a result. So really seeing this as a natural life transition, even if it's challenging, seeing that it is in many ways the end of one chapter of our life and the opening of a whole new door. And I think to be positive, to think this is not the end, this is the beginning of the next 30 plus years of my life. That's a long time. And so it's a time also of big change. If we have children, they're growing up. If we have parents, well, they may be no longer with us as we get older. So we need to begin to think, how would I like my life to be when some of these people may not be in it in the same way as they were? It's a chance to look at your relationships and say, are they working? How can we make them better? And if they're not working, is it time maybe to have new relationships? And they're both at work and personal. And when you're not the caregiver, the mother, the this, the that, all the roles that women have, you start to say, well, who am I? And what do I want? And I think that's the beauty of the menopause, that we start to come out from all the other roles and all the shoulds and musts and start to define our journey. You know, what would I like to do? What have I put on the back burner that I would like to bring out? What have I never got to? Because, you know, a career and children and all the other things that you should do between the ages of 20 and 45, 50. Of course you should. They're part of a different chapter of life. What have I put away and I'd love to do, but I've never got to do? Now's the chance to do them.
That's so beautifully put, you know, Clarissa. And certainly what I hear from my clients, my women clients, is that they feel they've lived their adult life in support of other people, raising children. And that's, of course, a wonderful, motherhood is a wonderful, you know, gift to give. So they've raised children, they're supporting spouses, they've put a lot of effort into a career, or even just maintaining a home, which is a lot of work. And their own needs and desires often get addressed last, if at all. And so what I hear is many women now want to start focusing on themselves more and doing more of, as you say, what they love and, you know, what they've perhaps put off for a long period of time. And of course, the organizing element for this masterclass series is Wild and Wise, Women Over 50. And so it's this idea that the wise part, we have decades of wisdom, we really do, and to acknowledge that, and to see now how, you know, how can I use that going forward, but also this unwillingness to perhaps play by the rules that have been imposed upon us, follow the norm, and just let our hair down, be a little bit more spontaneous, bring more fun and more joy in our lives. So what advice would you have for women, I suppose, that are in the midst of the symptoms, the awful symptoms of menopause? What can you tell them to help get through it, to deal with it on a day-to-day level, such that they can still live a full and happy life, and not feel that this thing that is going on in their bodies is just shutting them down?
Yeah, I think the important thing is to recognize that we can listen to our bodies, and we can build a tremendous amount of awareness that allows us to be an advocate for our own health. And I think a lot of the time we want to devolve that always to someone else. Well, now is the time to stand in your own two shoes, but it comes from awareness. So my thing to say to women is, get aware of what's going on with you and ask yourself, what can I do to change that? Because sometimes it is because we don't rest enough. It is because we need to make some shifts in our lifestyle that might serve us. And of course, there's a lot going on up here. You know, we think a lot of things that aren't always true. Our own biggest and loudest voice is our inner voice, but it's not always our friend. So it is good to reconnect with your thoughts and say, what could I do to turn to the positive? over and over again, because when we train to look for the good, whether you write a gratitude practice, whether you write down the 3 things that went well, you know, your little success log, and it's there if you look for it, then your brain starts to look for the good. It isn't always looking for everything that's wrong, and you retrain your brain towards being more open, more excited about life. And of course, as you go through menopause, you're dropping the mummy brain. You're upgrading to become a less anxious, less multitasking, more creative person, and a lot feistier. So we say what we want. And we need to ride that wave, you know, not suppress it down. I think that when those feelings come up and you feel the need to speak your mind, speak it. You know, we don't have to speak it with anger or that. We learn to channel all that energy into positivity, find great friends, build new relationships. These things empower us. So there is so much good we can grasp onto, even if the menopause symptoms are tough. And I think listening to lots of social media that's always talking about the negative isn't necessarily your best friend. Be aware, but don't be sucked into this sort of downward vortex of everything is hell, because people have a vested interest to tell you that as well.
That's very true. So I'm curious, Clarissa, when you're working with your clients, I have a dog as well, and I'm amazed that he's not vocalized yet.
Go down. Gosh, you're so naughty. Get out. She's gone in the other room.
Just wants to participate in the conversation.
No, she wants to be in the other room where my husband is.
Oh, I see.
That's what it is. She's a very rude little guy. My apologies.
That's all right. Not a problem. I was going to ask Clarissa, when you first start working with a client or a group of clients, what's the starting point? So I've heard you talk a lot about mindset and the importance of our perspective. And so how do you begin? What is your process in starting to work with new clients?
My process is actually to begin with the body. Strangely enough, that we begin here and build awareness of ourselves, as I was saying just earlier, really that grounding in the body, learning to listen to the body. That's the fundamental basis of most mindfulness practices, actually begin in the body, in this ability to sort of bring ourselves down, listen and tune in, and start to hear those messages that the body isn't at 100% horrificness all the time, but actually there's this fluidity in our experience, and beginning to tap in there, being able to stop when things feel like they're spinning out of control and come back to grounding or breathing. And for many women that I work with, that is a big step from what we normally do. Mm-hmm. Because even though women will say, well, I go to yoga, but there's an awful lot of twisting and getting into poses. So I do with groups and individuals a lot of initial work here to bring ourselves to an ability to listen. Then we can hear the signals. Then we can listen and see what the triggers to our experiences might be. And we're slowly putting together pieces of being in control rather than feel like we're always spinning out of control. And we can begin to take that awareness into our daily life. What's working for me? What gives me energy? What draws energy away from me? How can I start to reconstruct my life in a way that serves me? And of course, that then flows into movement and exercise. It flows into what we're eating more intuitively. So it really ripples out from there. And when we have that good grounding, then we can start to tackle the more difficult aspects, the emotions, the thoughts, but from a basis of knowing that we can always come back to being grounded in the body and stop and pause.
I really love that. And, you know, I've noticed for myself, I had gotten very good at ignoring the signals my body was sending me. And I think the body never lies. It's just that we feel we know better and we just soldier on. So a simple example, I've learned that, liquid dairy is just not the best thing for me. I love a good cold glass of milk, but my body doesn't love it. And if I drink it, I feel it right away. I feel it kind of bloating and my stomach is sort of churning. But we live our lives at such a pace, and I've always been one. I'm just one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. I don't have time to stop and pay attention to what my stomach is doing after that glass of milk. But that's, if I'm hearing you correctly, that's exactly what's needed, is just to really slow it down and pay attention and listen to what our bodies are telling us. And then I suppose even journaling, having a daily journaling practice, and that doesn't have to be lengthy, even just 15 minutes at the end of the day, and noting, how was I feeling after I consumed that meal or this food item, and what is my mood like? How are my emotions responding? Is that a fair
That's a very fair assessment. I mean, I do a lot of reflective practices that are both written and not written with people, so that, and we look at the ways our habits have unfolded, the ones that may not be serving us. I mean, a lot of women sometimes are aware of how much sugar they're eating, or as your case in dairy, or maybe even a wine. But we start to say things like, well, not just did you have a wine, but when did you have a drink? What time did you start drinking? Who were you with? Because then we get patterns of behavior that we can change. But if we don't know, we can't change anything. So it's really all of those aspects that, where can I pull levers that will make me feel better? Where do I need to seek professional help? But then we've got more of a journal to come to a doctor. If we just come and say, I don't feel very well, then we're annoyed when they just push something at us, but they're not telepathic either. But when we come and we say, look, I've been experiencing X, Y, and Z. Do you think that I could be coming into menopause? What are you able to do for me? You might get a much better response, particularly if you go to someone who is menopause specialist, because they're able to hear what's going on and work with you. But too often we're relying on just vagaries or tests, and tests are meaningless most of the time in this arena. Even though I know lots of women are sold various tests for their hormones, they're very rarely an accurate reflection. It's your own experience and being aware of it is the best way to track and measure where you're at.
And it's very interesting, because I think it points to our willingness, I suppose, to give over agency to others, to just assume that the doctor will know better than we know with respect to our own bodies. And it's not the case. As you say, oftentimes medical professionals are guessing based on best knowledge and practice at the time, but there's so much we don't know generally. But as individuals, we women can make ourselves a kind of case study, I suppose, and really be mindful about the relationship between food and our bodies, food and our emotions, food and our sort of mental state. And so tracking it, that might actually make visits to the doctor less necessary, because if you're tracking your food, for example, and you notice, if I have a glass of red wine, which is something I notice right away, I'll have a headache and a flush. So I just don't have red wine. And there are other things I can have that are fine, that will substitute. But is it worth the discomfort I experience to be able to enjoy that glass of red wine? And for me, no, it isn't. So I've looked for alternatives. But do you find that women are just too willing perhaps to hand over their agency to others, and not just recognizing they themselves already know if they just stop and listen and pay attention?
I think we've been taught to be like that. Our culture teaches us to be like that. We don't come from a very self-reliant health culture. And I contrast that with looking at how Asian women, for example, manage menopause. There's a lot of emphasis on movement and diet and resting, and recognizing that we need a shift in that space compared to Western women, because we want to keep pushing at the same speed, staying the same weight, whatever that's supposed to be or not, living the same life, and hit a bit of a junction. And in fact, we're sometimes called to slow down and to ask others to do more for us. And all of these things are hard because they're culturally ingrained. Mm-hmm. And so that's a little bit of the relearning. And if we can do this now, then, we do go through it. I mean, a few years down the line, your menopause symptoms will be over. They'll have shifted and changed during that period. And then suddenly you'll be over here and you'll be going, well, that stage is over and energy returns. It's different, but it does return, and we feel revitalized, and we are those wild, wise women because we've got a different kind of energy and the wisdom to use it well.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. And that's a lovely first full circle moment. And so I guess as a last thing, I'd like to ask you what one piece of advice could you give our listeners, if there is one, and I know there'd be lots of things to say, but a key piece that could help them just manage this time with a little more grace and ease?
Yeah, I think make some time every day for you. Stop, pause, and give yourself, everybody has 10 minutes somewhere in the day, even if you don't think you have. Make that about you, to sit quietly, to check in how you're feeling, to say something good to yourself about something that went well, because in every day there was something that went well, however small. And if you can do that for yourself, then you see the positive coming through. And with time, that's your default.
That's really lovely. Thank you. Lastly, Clarissa, I'd like to invite you to share with the audience. You've got a wonderful gift for them.
I do.
Why don't you let us know what that is?
I do. I have an ebook gift that I'm giving away, which is one of the parts of my course that I teach, which is about coming into connection with how your energy flows, particularly, when we feel fatigue and exhaustion and lack of sleep. How do we get off the pushing energy? And it's a workbook. And so it's very much you answer the questions and reflect on them and think about how you can make shifts in your life and get more energy and break through some of this fatigue. And it's called Moving into Balance.
I love it. That's so generous. And thank you very much for that. And thank you particularly for doing this interview with me. I've loved it. I think we could have talked for at least an hour on these issues, if not more. So I appreciate your time, and I know everyone has learned a lot from you. So thank you very much. Very grateful.
Thank you, Kit, for having me.
Take care.